There's something about a brilliant mind, isn't there? Especially one that walks that razor's edge between genius and, well, madness. For more than 100 years, we've been totally captivated by these two figures, the detective who can solve any crime, and the criminal who's just as smart, maybe even smarter. So today, we're going to dig into why we're so obsessed.
I mean, think about it. What is it about these minds? Why do we find ourselves just as drawn to the hero who catches the monster as we are to the monster themselves? It's like they're two sides of the same, incredibly brilliant and, let's be honest, pretty dangerous coin.
All right, so let's start with the good guy, right? The hero, the genius detective. They're so much more than just a character in a book. They're this promise, this idea that no matter how chaotic or violent or just plain senseless things get, one powerful mind can step in, find the pattern, and make it all make sense again.
And when you think of that archetype, you really have to start with one name, Sherlock Holmes. The Sherlock Holmes paradigm, as it's known, is way more than just a guy in a funny hat. No, it's about this very specific brand of genius. Super observant, hyper-logical, but also really weird, deeply eccentric. And that combination, it became the blueprint, the absolute foundation for pretty much every great detective that came after. He didn't just solve crimes, he basically invented a new kind of hero. And you can see just how powerful that idea is by how long it's stuck around. I mean, you start with Holmes back in 1887, and then that same basic DNA just gets remixed over and over again for new generations. You see it with Hercule Poirot and his little gray cells, right? Or you fast forward to Adrian Monk, whose OCD is his superpower. And of course, there's the modern BBC Sherlock, who pretty much calls himself a high-functioning sociopath. The style, the setting, that all changes. But that core idea of the eccentric genius, it's still totally irresistible.
But here's the catch, right? That kind of brain power, it always seems to come at a cost. This isn't just some quirky little personality trait the writers throw in for fun. It's absolutely fundamental to who these characters are. Their genius is the very thing that makes them outsiders, the thing that lets them see the world in a way that, normal people just can't.
There's this great quote from the philosopher John Stuart Mill that really hits the nail on the head. He was writing back in the 19th century, and he basically said that eccentricity, genius, and courage are all linked. For him, not fitting in wasn't a bad thing at all. It was a sign that society was actually healthy. So when you look at it that way, our eccentric detective isn't just being weird. They're actually a kind of necessary rebellion against a world that's always trying to make everyone the same. And what does that look like in practice? Well, these geniuses are often kind of aloof, right? A little socially awkward. They look at all the monotonous little habits of society and just get bored. So they become these lone wolves, totally operating on their own frequency. And that creates this constant tension, this incredibly fine line they're always walking between being praised for their genius and, well, being dismissed for their madness. Okay, so we love the genius who uses their outsider status to help us, to serve society. But that leads to a much, much darker question, doesn't it? And maybe an even more fascinating one. What happens when that exact same kind of brilliant, non-conforming mind decides, you know what? I'm not going to serve society, I'm going to prey on it. And that is exactly where we meet the dark mirror to Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Think about it. If Holmes is the genius who restores order from chaos, Lecter is the genius who masterfully creates it. He is the absolute pinnacle of the sophisticated killer, a mind where brilliance isn't used for justice, it's a weapon for pure, unadulterated horror. It's a perfect flip of the coin. The eccentric detective, he's an outsider, sure, but he ultimately serves the very society that doesn't quite get him. He uses his amazing brain to piece the world back together. But the sophisticated killer, he's an outsider too, but he uses that same intellect to tear the world apart, one victim at a time, just to prove that he's better than everyone else.
So how do you even begin to understand a mind like Lecter's? Well, there's this really interesting psychological tool called sublimation, and it's a wild idea. It's the theory that our brains can take something really dark, a traumatic memory, an unacceptable impulse, and unconsciously transform it into something socially acceptable, something people might even admire, like incredible art or groundbreaking science, or even becoming a world-class psychiatrist.
And if you look at Lecter's backstory, you can see this process play out perfectly. It all begins with this unspeakable trauma from his childhood. His mind just can't handle it, so it buries the memory deep down. But that psychic energy has to go somewhere, right? So it gets sublimated, it gets channeled into becoming this brilliant psychiatrist, this man of impeccable taste. But here's the crucial part. At the same time, he starts to identify with the people who hurt him. He unconsciously adopts the very act that destroyed his life. So his sophistication isn't just a cover for his monstrosity, it's actually born from it.
See, we can sit here and psychoanalyze Hannibal Lecter all day. We can trace his evil back to a root cause, which is kind of comforting in a weird way. But that's a luxury that fiction gives us, because in the real world, the monsters that are the most terrifying are the ones we can't understand at all, the ones who are just a terrifying blank space.
And that brings us to the Zodiac Killer. See, with Holmes or Lecter, we're fascinated by their personalities. With the Zodiac, we're fascinated by the complete lack of one. It's an absence. Our brains are wired to find patterns, to get closure. We hate not knowing. The Zodiac gives us absolutely nothing. He's not a character. He's a living question mark, a ghost who haunted Northern California and then just disappeared, leaving nothing behind but ciphers and this deep, lingering sense of dread.
And what made it all so much worse were his own words. That simple, bone-chilling opening to his letters. It turned him from just another attacker into this terrifying media personality. He wasn't just killing people, he was putting on a show, a performance. And he forced the entire Bay Area to be his audience.
I mean, his shadow over pop culture is just massive. Because the case was never solved, he basically became this blank canvas for all our fears. He was a direct inspiration for the Scorpio Killer in Dirty Harry. He was a huge influence on the Riddler in The Batman. His name pops up in everything from Criminal Minds to American Horror Story. He's even become this weird viral internet meme. And it's all because we don't know who he was. So he can be anyone. He can be anything our nightmares need him to be.
So, what do we have? We have the hero, the monster, and the ghost. 3 totally different figures, but we keep coming back to them again and again. So why? What is it about them? At the end of the day, I think it all comes down to a really basic human need. Our need to find patterns, to find meaning, especially when we're staring into chaos.
You could say these stories are like a cultural forum. That's a fancy way of saying they're a safe place for us to deal with our biggest anxieties. We get to look right at that scary line between genius and madness. We get to think about how fragile our society really is, and we get to peek into the darkest corners of the human mind, all without ever having to leave the couch. It's a safe way to touch something dangerous.
And each of these figures we've talked about scratches a different itch. The genius detective? That's about hope. The hope that a smart enough person can always beat the chaos. The fictional killer? That's about our desire to understand evil, to give it a reason. And the real-world mystery, the ghost, that forces us to face our deepest fear, the terrifying idea that some evil doesn't have a reason and that we might never understand it.
So let me leave you with this question to chew on. When we watch these brilliant, deviant minds at work, are we really looking for the comfort of seeing order restored? Or is there a part of us that's secretly drawn to the thrill of watching it all fall apart? Just to be reminded of how terrifyingly thin that line really is, between a mind that saves the world and one that decides to watch it burn.